one quick announcement. There was a cell phone left in the restroom, and here we go. Problem solved. My work here is done. Okay, if everybody wants to go ahead and start making their way back to their tables, that would be fantastic. And that'll give us a chance to get back to the program, because it is now my pleasure to introduce Drew Ramsey. Drew is currently a national sales director with GAF Materials. He was born and raised in Orlando and currently lives there with his wife and 2 sons. Having spent over 2 decades in commercial construction materials, working for manufacturers in the roofing and coating space, he has been a part of the evolution from a purely utilitarian focus to understanding how the right materials utilized in the right places can contribute to so much more. Most recently, he has been involved in numerous large-scale heat island mitigation projects focused on surface coatings and roofing, and the ability to design for both sustainability and resiliency has inspired him to lead new initiatives within the company. Please join me in welcoming Drew Ramsey.
I'll let IT log me in. So.
Okay.
Thank you. I broke it. I haven't even touched it yet. So this is not a this is a harbinger of impending doom. So. All right. Well, you work on that. I'll make a couple of brief notes. So when super excited to be here, obviously. When Megan and Lizzie reached out, I said, yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity. We'll send somebody really great to come and speak. Instead, you guys got stuck with me. So we'll muddle through it and see what we can do. I'll also say a couple other things. One is I want you to leave this presentation and say that guy had no idea what he was talking about, but man, is he ruggedly handsome. And if I can achieve that, we'll be in good shape. So no, obviously, I'll kind of try to talk to, without overlapping too much with some of the other presentations, talk to some of the actual, where the rubber hits the proverbial road a little bit, and some of the stuff that's actually going on there. And then the other thing is, I'm still trying to figure out how you convert your birthday to parts per million, but I will teach you a vocab word, which is ultracrepidarianism, and I will not practice that today, which is talking outside of one's actual field of expertise. So. I did my 3 minutes of crowd work.
I know, you did so well.
I'm burning through all of it right now.
Yeah.
What was that word again?
Ultracrepidarianism.
Ooh, word of the day. What does that mean?
Speaking outside of one's own field.
Oh.
So, as an expert in something that you're not actually an expert in, which seems to be the common case in society now.
It was just
I
there.
know. Well, it was.
The last thing I will say is, unlike the previous speaker who's probably overqualified, I am underqualified, and I am capitalism, so don't throw anything at me.
We wanted to bring a diverse range
Positive
of speakers
capitalism.
here.
Yeah, conscious capitalism. So.
Wait for it.
Awesome. Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Clicker.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Appreciate it. I probably don't need this. My wife tells me I probably don't need a microphone. I can assure you of that. All right. So we'll go through this, and this is actually a presentation that's adapted for something we did at Greenbuild the other year. So this is just preamble for AIA stuff. That's me. So we're going to go through kind of the urban heat island effect, what that really means. I'll keep that at a brief level because we've already touched base on that with a couple of the other speakers. But we'll actually talk about some actual implementations of mitigation tactics that are being used out there, kind of the practicality of some of that stuff and what that looks like in the real world. And that'll encompass some general things on roofing and then pavement coatings, right? So. what is the urban heat island effect? I think everybody already knows this, but basically urban areas hotter than adjacent non-urban areas, right? So you have all these proverbial heat sinks that we've basically built that are in many cases not only not reflective, they're not emissive either, right? Meaning they don't release that heat either, right? They charge it up like a battery, but not the good kind of battery, the bad kind of battery that just releases heat all night long. So that's basically that. And as you can see, I mean, it can be pretty significant. And a lot of people think about urban heat island effect in terms of daytime temperatures. What's kind of interesting is there's a pretty drastic impact on nighttime temperatures too. So LA, for instance, has done a lot of work in this and using satellite imagery and other stuff. And with mitigation tactics, you actually can sometimes see a bigger difference at night than you do during the day because you have, again, these heat sinks that charge up all day long. And then even though the sun's gone, they're just releasing heat all night long. And nighttime is really, most medical professionals and organizations that have spoken to this, nighttime is particularly an important time to cool off because that's kind of when your body resets and regenerates and everything. And if you don't get that at night and you have that cumulative effect, that's really when you see like prolonged heat stress effects and things of that nature. So, why it matters, I think we all know why it matters, but you've obviously got a lot of people now more than ever living in these heat zones, right? As people move out of rural areas, move into city centers, it becomes more and more important. 80 million people, and this is actually 2 years old, so that's probably closer to 100 million people live in areas now that, are under record-breaking heat advisories. We just heard, we've done some work with the city of Phoenix, and obviously we just heard everything about Tempe. And you've got over 100 days at 110 degrees, right? So it's not going the other direction anytime soon. It contributes to air quality. Obviously, we've seen in this state, in Western North Carolina, it may or may not affect, water implications, certainly coastal erosion, all those things. So there's a lot that goes into it, but obviously the cumulative effect of all of that is not great, right, for society long term. There's always been a couple of different ways you tackle that. Shade structures, trees, that's really good. We all love trees. Trees are awesome. I think that probably even me as a stone cold capitalist, we'd get rid of all the hardscapes if we could. It's just not possible, right? Like we need buildings to live in, so we have to have buildings. They have to have roofs. We have to have streets. We have to have sidewalks. We have to have these things. So I think you start looking at like shade structures, trees, reintegrating green into some areas. Those are all really powerful tactics, but then what do we do to kind of help out with those less desirable surfaces that we can't eliminate, right? And so that's kind of where you get to, right, with these different avenues. I'll tell you that, to put it in perspective, I would say roofing, cool roofs are 15 to 20 years ahead of cool surfaces, right? And by that I mean whether it's playgrounds, whether it's roads, whether it's pedestrian plazas, all that kind of stuff. So all of us have either been in a Walmart, whether we want to admit it or not, or at least seen one. So we'll use Walmart as a good example because it's, everybody has a clear vision in their head of what a Walmart supercenter looks like. So you think about a Walmart supercenter, well over 10 years ago, Walmart adopted, only putting cool roofs on their buildings, right? So basically every Walmart that's built now, every Walmart that's been re-roofed in probably about the last 15 years all has a cool roof on it, which is great, right? That's part of what we're doing, and there's a financial payback too, and in the efficiency of the air conditioning system. So there's a great story there, and we're reflecting all that back. But that's about 200,000 square feet, depending on when they were building it, right? Their parking lots are generally 400 to 450,000 square feet, right? And then what do they do with that parking lot every 2, 3, 4, 5 years? They paint it jet black, right? They actually make the heat sink worse. The funny part, and we'll touch on it real quick, asphalt, as it degrades, actually tends to get more reflective to a point. It's also falling apart at the same time, but when you go back and you do a traditional seal coat or you do something of that nature, you actually decrease the albedo and decrease the emissivity, right? So you're actually counterproductive. So it's great that you're doing this cool roof, but then you have over twice as much square footage outside in that same urban area that you're actually making worse, right? And so that's, obviously a factor. When you look at, and some other people kind of touch this, right, but socioeconomically depressed areas, communities of color are often disproportionately impacted. And some of that is just they tend to have less trees in those neighborhoods. There's more hardscapes. There's less areas, less splash pads, less areas to escape, that kind of stuff. So, but obviously you can see, in the mean, there's actually a real temperature difference, when you evaluate those populations. So. What are communities doing about heat? We heard a lot about that already. There's voluntary efforts. There are some mandatory efforts. So a couple of examples: City of Denver, for instance. Anytime you're doing a new roof or a re-roof inside the city limits, it has to either, and there's a couple ways around it, but with 90% of the time, it either has to be a vegetative roof or it has to have photovoltaics on it, right? So that's an example. Miami-Dade has looked at some stuff of like making new parking lots have to be reflective within the city, right? So there's a lot of different approaches, and then obviously there's a lot of the voluntary stuff, right? So this is in Portland, so they put a vegetative roof on this. You've seen this at convention centers. It's a great potential solution. It's certainly not for everything. There are some drawbacks to doing a vegetative roof, but the upside is not only is it cooler, right? It's not emissive, or it is highly emissive, and the other thing is it can also, obviously contribute to cleaning up, air pollution, retaining water, right, and not dumping that immediately into a sewer system and stuff like that when you start to look at water management. So community engagement, obviously I'm not going to tell you guys how to do that, you're well aware, but there's a lot that goes into it. I think the one note I will say about that is I think what's really important is you're always going to have people that don't want to do it for a bunch of different reasons. When you're evaluating and kind of putting that stakeholder pool together, if you can work with a partner or work with an actual person that's going to physically do some work when it comes to mitigation tactics and everything else, to go back to, let's say, some of those curmudgeon people that don't want to do it, and really present to them some of the practical benefits too, I think you can get a lot of buy-in. For instance, with some of the cool street stuff that people were doing initially, product selection was questionable, execution was questionable. So you had, Department of Public Works, roads folks, they got really disillusioned really fast, right? But if you can go back to them and say, hey, listen, we're not spray painting the road white. This is actually a coating that's going to extend the life of the asphalt. It's going to push out mill and repaves. It's going to do all these other things. It's a lot easier to get that group of kind of stakeholders to buy in and help you and become an advocate as opposed to, somebody standing in your way. So albedo, obviously I think everybody knows what that is, but that's how, bouncing stuff back. What I'll say about this that you guys might not know, obviously higher albedo means it's reflecting more, lower albedo means it's reflecting less. The part of the spectrum that it reflects can be extremely important. So we'll go back to roofing. Roofing is great because you can basically, whether it's a coating, whether it's a sheet good, you can dump a ton of titanium dioxide in it, make it super white, put the roof on and walk away. But nobody has to interact with that surface on a daily basis once it's installed. So that's a fine mitigation tactic for roofing. When you talk about a surface that somebody's going to drive on, that somebody's going to walk on, making it as white as humanly possible, you will get a massive amount of pushback from the community. It doesn't stay clean. The age reflectivity is poor. And for anybody that's ever gone skiing on a really sunny day, you literally go snowblind, right? There's glare, so there's actually safety issues. And the other thing is the so you have MRT, which is mean radiant temperature, and then you have PET, which is physiologically experienced temperature, right? And with PET, people will actually be on a reflective surface and they'll say they feel hotter, right? If you use the wrong product and the wrong solution in the wrong spot. So that's where it's real critical to look for solutions, especially in services that people are going to interact with, that push back a wider range of the spectrum, right? And that can really help with thermal comfort, right? In addition to achieving your objectives of reflectivity. So this is just to give you an idea of, different biomes and what they reflect. As we were talking about snow is 0.65. Like, it's highly reflective. You wouldn't want to hang out on it all day on a sunny day. So when you look at this, right, and you say, this is what these cities look like, right? So Pasadena is house on top of house on top of house, divided only by roads, right? And so obviously you have a huge capacity in the Pasadena example versus the Northeast Houston, the more rural side of Houston, as if there is much of that left. But where the roof mitigation in Pasadena would be much more powerful than maybe it would be in the northeast corner of Houston, right? And so how that works is, like I said, you have two factors you really want to consider. Reflectivity, which is how much of that it's going to bounce back, and then emissivity, which is how long it's basically going to hold on to that energy for. So when you look at some traditional old roofing, whether it's asphaltic, whether it's black rubber, EPDM, very low reflectivity, very low emissivity, right? So it doesn't reflect a lot of it. It gets extremely hot, and it doesn't release that energy very fast, right? Versus a white roof, substantially more reflectivity, right? And substantially more emissivity. So it doesn't store that up all day long. This is literally an example. In the same climate, you could take a cool roof at 90 degrees, black rubber, you could literally fry an egg on it. As a young man who used to do real work at one point in his life, I've been on plenty of black roofs. It's not a place you want to be in the middle of August in any southern climate. So, and like I said, the positive is the industry has really shifted away primarily from dark colored roofs to cool roofs. And like I said, there's a lot of practical applications to that as well, and a lot of benefit. So, those kind of include, obviously, there's a lot of different coating technologies. Most coatings are white and highly reflective, so you can go in and restore an existing roof surface, right? Sometimes there's some benefit there because it's less costly than putting a brand new roof on in the right situation. Certainly highly reflective, white membranes like TPO, like PVC, those can be highly effective. Most of your big box retailers, for instance, at this point, just as a frame of reference, do TPO, white TPO. Most of your Amazon warehouses are white TPO, so everybody's kind of, pushed in that direction. I think the other thing about the roofing aspect is, and we kind of briefly touched on it, but water management, right? And so we don't have, fortunately in the United States, most of us have clean drinking water to drink. In a lot of other countries, we actually do some work where they're doing water catchment and they're literally going to drink it, right? So obviously roofing selection is real critical at that point, but there are solutions out there that are, NSF 151 rated for potable water, that you can do other things. So even if you're only going to use it for gray water, let's say you're going to do plants, you're going to do flushing of toilets, that kind of stuff. We've worked on a number of projects, and there's a huge avenue there. And the other thing is just not letting all that water go into the system all at once, right? So there's a lot of ways you can work roofing into the water management conversation too. And I think because we don't have the necessity that other places have, we probably don't do that enough in this country, and we don't look at that as part of the holistic option. I think Paris, before the Olympics, probably wishes they were catching more roof water on roofs and not dumping it into the sewer to go into the river, but so, that's obviously a thing. Even on the residential side, there are opportunities. Asphalt shingles are still the most ubiquitous, material that's put on residential roofs on steep slope. There are options there where they are more reflective. I will tell you that you get a lot of push because a lot of people still are very strongly adamant about the aesthetic, right? Because it's their house, it has to match their paint job, it has to match everything else. But there are a lot of options in that realm. And then even in, things like how the product is manufactured, who's manufacturing it, there's been a lot of progress there too, right? We kind of talked about it, but obviously photovoltaics are a huge one because you can obviously generate power from the roof. Vegetative roofs, they're really great. As we kind of mentioned, the downside to that a little bit is you will find scenarios where it can make the roofing a little more challenging. And certainly if anybody ever has to go and find a leak under, that field of grass, it's not the easiest thing to do in the world. So you want to make sure somebody does it right the first time before you put that on. Paver systems can even help with that. They can make it a walkable surface. They can obviously cool it off too, depending on what it's going over. Photovoltaics have come a long way too, right? The panels have gotten a lot more efficient. You can actually even use bifacial panels in some circumstances where the reflective roof surface actually increases the energy efficiency of the panel because it's bouncing up from underneath as well. And you actually find that bifacial panel efficiency increase with reflective like pavement coatings. So if you were going to do a canopy, let's say a carport canopy solar array, if you actually use a reflective coating on the parking lot, you're getting it from both sides, obviously, and so you actually increase the efficiency of the panels. So another thing that people don't really think about when you're looking at the practical implications. So, I mean, there's a financial upside there too, right? You're going to produce more electricity, which is a win for everybody. So raising the albedo of pavements, we kind of talked about this already. Concrete tends to start out at a little bit higher albedo, obviously, than asphalt. And then as it gets dirty, as it ages, it actually decreases in albedo. Asphalt does kind of the opposite. As it degrades, it tends to get higher in albedo, but that's because the aggregate's getting exposed and the binder's going away, and then you end up with potholes and all sort of cracking and all sorts of other issues. So neither one is really desirable. I'll also say the embodied carbon, as I'm sure everyone in this room is much smarter than I am, but the carbon impact of concrete is actually much higher than asphalt. Asphalt's more easily recyclable too. I'm not an asphalt salesman. I'm just saying that when we look at surfaces, you can do some really cool stuff like LAUSD, for instance, which is, I think, second largest, depending on how you dice it up, school district in the country. But they do asphalt pads for their playgrounds. And then they go and actually coat them with highly reflective coatings, which put games and make them like way more engaging, but also cool them off. And the total cost of that is actually less than just pouring concrete, right? And so you actually end up with what's potentially a more sustainable solution and actually a more cost-effective solution. So there's a lot of ways to implement these strategies. So that being said, so you can look at, this is an example. This is actually in Houston, where cool pavement coatings have been put on the surface, right? So on the left, is this your left? Yeah, sure. That's untreated, and you can actually see that's lighter than like brand new asphalt would be, so the albedo is actually higher on that. So if you actually compared the cool pavement coating in this case to a brand new road, the difference would actually be even more drastic, right? It would be about another 6 to 7 degrees. But you can see that the nice part is too, talking about reflecting the full spectrum of UV, talking about solutions that the community will buy into. That is a cool pavement coating in this example. It is not insanely white, right? So it's really nice to do that. And then people, generally the adoption from the community is much, much higher. So we've actually done quite a bit of work with the city of Phoenix, and their initial solution was very, very white, and they got a lot of pushback. It was also still asphaltic based, so it kind of defeated the purpose of doing a sustainable solution. But so you can see, and then obviously from the thermal imagery, it just kind of reinforces that. So we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. You have a darker colored cool pavement solution. You have a brighter colored cool pavement solution. Obviously a lot of potential downside to the white color, long term and in the short term, just as far as community adoption. And as you can see, I think that photo is only 2 months old, and you can see on the white like how disgustingly dirty it is, and everybody spills their milkshake on it, and all sorts of other good stuff. And so we also discussed, so there's on and off-road applications for all of this when we talk about the surface coating side of it. Obviously, that is actually, we were talking about LAUSD, that's actually an LAUSD school that they did. Aside from the sustainability side, aside from the heat island mitigation effect, I always say the before image looks like a rec yard at like a prison. And I'm like, I don't know that I would want my kid out there, regardless of whether he's going to have a heat stroke. It just looks terrible. And then, so they actually took that, all those colors, even the darker colors, are highly reflective, LEED compliant colors. So they actually took that, obviously re-emphasized the games, made the engagement higher. LAUSD's done some interesting work. A little bit of it's somewhat anecdotal, but what's interesting is like, between the engagement factor and the reduction in temperature, kids actually play longer, right? Like they don't go try to sit under shade, they actually go out there and play. So, and obviously in addition to, you know, the world maybe melting as we heard earlier, kids are not in particularly good shape across the spectrum. So anything we can do, you know, on that front too, if you can kill 3 birds with 1 stone, it's obviously a good thing. So this is just a little bit about the imbalance in radiation. So we are not pushing back out nearly as much radiation as we're taking in, which is, you know, part of the greenhouse gas conversation, part of all these conversations. And it doesn't seem like it's trending in the right direction. So that imbalance is going to continue to be greater, right? So again, we have to look at, you know, what can we do to make that situation better. And so we've done a lot of work with Climate Resolve. Some of you guys might be familiar with them. Pretty interesting organization that gets involved in a lot of stuff. But obviously their focus is on, you know, really looking for mitigation tactics and everything else. And this just kind of shows you, you know, some of the CO2 modeling and everything else. That's their advisory board. All right, so we'll talk about a really cool case study. So this is probably the largest third party, like actually academically vetted study on using coatings as a heat island mitigation tactic. So this is Pacoima, which is a socioeconomically in disadvantaged people of color area of LA, right outside of LA. So what's really interesting is the city of LA selected this area. They said, hey, it's really, really hot here. There's no trees. You know, it's a great place to go. So that's where we did the study, right? And so what's really interesting is you'll kind of see as we go through this, all the roads were treated in this area, a 10 square block area, so a pretty large area, right? People have done like a parking lot and then measured. It's really hard to measure like ambient temperature and stuff like that at a really small scale, so you really had to go quite large, right? So this is a 10 city block area that was completely coated. The school was coated, the basketball courts were coated, everything that was basically a hardscape in that area was coated, right? And the other thing they did that was kind of cool is they did a warming strip street mural. So that actually from the blue side to the really dark orange, that's the heating of Los Angeles since like the 70s to now. So all those colors are actually highly reflective too, which is cool. It's self-defeated if they weren't, but so as part of it, and so that's right there in the community where they actually started this project and where they put the first coatings down to really demonstrate to the city, like, hey, this is why we're doing this and this is what this looks like, you know. So this is the school that they also did that was within this area, this 10 block area. So they did all the playground services at the school, all that good stuff, which was really cool. Not only did it create a, you know, better environment for the kids, but, you know, it obviously had some enormous benefits. And so that area at the school was over 130,000 square feet by itself of coatings. They also did some really cool murals within the thing. So that was it was a great way to get the community out. So obviously contractors did the road work, but you were actually able to get some local artists and some actual community members to come out with the coatings on the basketball court and the mural. That's a really cool way to get engagement and actually have people put some sweat equity into it, which is a really cool tactic, I think. And fortunately, you know, most people can paint, even me, who's very unskilled at physical labor. And so it's a great way to kind of get that engagement. It's just showing you what the basketball court at the local park looked like. They also did the parking lot at the local park that's adjacent to that. And you can see, you know, the thermal imagery of the court after it was actually done, as opposed to the untreated area at that time around it, right? So it's a pretty drastic difference when you start looking at it from a drone or from a satellite imagery. So the research, this is kind of the critical part. Like I said, people have done really like haphazard stuff and tried to measure historic. That's very difficult to put any like correlation, causation, you know. So when you really look at it, like difference of differences is kind of the best way to do it. So what they actually did and what this demonstrates is simultaneously they were taking data points all throughout the day from both the treated area and the directly adjacent untreated 10 block area as well, right? So you get it's the exact same climate on the exact same day in the exact same area, right? So that's as close as you're gonna get to a control, right? And so multiple times a day, they drove this funny looking golf cart with all these things hanging off of it, which I'm sure the people in the neighborhood had, God knows, they thought they were probably, jet streams or some sort of poisoning or something else, but it was all just data gathering. And so they did that for over 6 months, right, to gather this data. And so this just kind of shows the path that the cart took. But so what's really interesting is, the impact was actually greater than we even thought, right? So surface temperature, we knew there'd be a reduction in surface temperature, right? That's easy to take an infrared thermometer, hit it, know that that's going to happen, right? So like we said, finding the right mitigation tactic, you had really, really, really good feedback from the community, right? From all the people that live in those neighborhoods, which is great. So air temperature reduction. So we actually got substantial and repeated air temperature reduction, right? Which is pretty awesome. So in excess of a degree Celsius, right? All the way up to 3.5 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale. So the other thing that's really cool is because LA was so involved, they actually measured heat-related emergency room visits. Those went down 2.1% during this window, right? So like that's a real visceral, practical application of like, hey, this isn't just about saving the whales per se. This is actually saving people's lives, right? And actually putting them in a better situation. So, and what's really important is this type of mitigation tactic seems to have the most effect when the heat's the worst, when you need it the most, right? So that's what's really interesting too, and I think really positive when we look at it. Surface temperature reduction was very substantial as well, right? What's funny is, some of you probably have been to Florida before, I'm sure. We have the largest, I'll say, retirement monstrosity on the face of the earth, which is the Villages. And so they do a lot of things there, but square dances, they also have an enormously high incidence rate of STDs, but God bless them. They're trying to ride it out in style. Most of them have $50,000 golf carts and exceptionally yippy dogs. No offense to anyone who has a yippy dog, but so what's really interesting is we've done some work with them and they've done some work on this, and what they really started with was one of the first parking lots that they did with a highly reflective coating was at a dog park, because the dogs were getting out of the car and in the middle of August they were burning their little paws, and so that was where they started, and they're like, oh, this actually works, right? And so they do a lot of events at their themed town centers and everything else. And so kind of to land the airplane in the nighttime thing, what they said was they've coated a lot of these parking lots that they may use in the evenings for events with highly reflective coatings. And so what they find is like as soon as the sun's gone, it's like somebody flipped a switch, right? And so at 7 o'clock at night, you're not still standing out there just feeling like you're baking anymore, right? It has an enormous impact on the usability of the space and people coming out to do it. So, I mean, it's really great. And like I said, you can kind of see from this sign that's at a park, surface temperature, air temperature of 87, surface temperature of over 140, and human skin burns at 125, right? So, I mean, you don't even have to have a 100-degree day to be at a point where that asphalt surface, it's the same with, splash pads, all sorts of other stuff, any place the kids are gonna be with exposed feet, like, aside from the heat island mitigation, like the real, feet on the ground effect is like, we got to cool these surfaces off because people are going to get hurt more and more often, right? Just from a burn standpoint. So I know I'm between you guys at lunch, so I went kind of fast. I did leave room for questions. That actually is a project that we did at UT. That's shameless plug. That's our pavement coating that we did in front of the stadium. But so that was shortly after install. It doesn't look quite that good anymore, but nothing lasts forever. So with that, I think we have a little bit of time. So I'll be here for a couple minutes into lunch, and then I actually have to catch an airplane home. But if anybody had a quick question, I'm happy to pretend to answer it. So. Yes, sir.
You might not have the answer, but I'm sure you'll probably give us one.
Yeah. That's what I do. So yeah, absolutely.
On the solar PV question, I think GAF has solar shingles.
We do.
Too.
We do.
How is that technology coming along comparing to
Well, now I can give you a sales pitch because we're through the AIA part, so I no longer have to be agnostic. It's really coming along. I think that we kind of talked about adoption, and you can't wait forever, but trying to really find the right solution as opposed to being, kind of snake oiled is really critical. I have nothing against Tesla, but Tesla had solar panels. Everybody had house solar panels. But most of the companies that were doing it didn't know anything about keeping water out of your house, which we all want our roofs to produce solar, but they need to keep the water out of our house, right? And not have a detrimental impact on the lifespan of our roofs. So we took a different tact and we said, well, we know how to keep water out of your house. Let's figure out the solar generation side. And we also were more tuned in, and we're not the only ones. There's other people going down this path too, of aesthetics do actually matter, right? A, it's getting an HOA to buy in, which is obviously critical, or whatever other ordinance you're under. And B, it's people not everybody is so committed that they want their house to be hideously ugly just to produce power, right? So what we've done is we have a product called Timberline Solar. You can do the Googles and find it. But it's an integrated solar panel that basically lays flush with the roof. And it doesn't look exactly like a shingle, but it looks a lot like a shingle, right? So as far as it's not curb mounted, doesn't stick out, it's not on a rack, and it integrates in the rest of the roof. So from a waterproofing standpoint, it's spot on. And the power generation on this second generation has been really, really good, right? So yeah, that's balancing all the factors and getting people to buy in on a practical solution that people can get behind, I think is extremely important. So.
Could you please address the trade-offs between permeability and reflectivity of the surfaces?
Yeah, it's at least from our experience, it's more difficult to achieve reflectivity with a permeable surface, right? So it's kind of a balancing act. I think the other thing you can look at too, in addition to that, is what the runoff looks like, right? So not heating the runoff can actually have a pretty big effect, right? Not putting super hot water into a pond where fish are trying to live that cause algae blooms and everything else. So permeability, obviously, depending on where you're at and what you're trying to achieve is extremely important. It's, like I said, in our experience, it's been very difficult to do something that's both permeable and highly reflective, right? So it's very difficult to go in and obviously coat something. If you coat it at that point, you've taken the permeability out of it, right? So it's a little bit of a balancing act. What we have seen cities do is do kind of like permeable medians and things of that nature, right? So you have kind of that aspect, and then in the road, where it's less desirable. Also, a lot of the time, permeable pavements aren't quite as durable as non-permeable pavements. So that's the other downside, is the life cycle is a little bit less. So, good question, though. Yes, ma'am.
So I hope you didn't already answer this, but I was wondering about cost. If you have an existing roof or an existing driveway and you want to put reflective coating on top of it, how much does something like that cost? Let's say a 2,000 square foot house, if you're going to put a coating on the roof, on a shingle roof.
I would not coat a shingle roof. It causes some breathability issues. It can mess with your, kind of your ventilation and everything else. What you could do, obviously, when it's time to replace it is get a reflective shingle, like with a reflective granule on it, right? Which will achieve the same purpose. Just as and there's roofers in the back of the room too, I would not coat a shingle. Like you're opening yourself up to some issues as far as actual functionality of the shingle and life expectancy, so.
How about an asphalt driveway?
Yeah, asphalt driveway, to do a reflective coating, whether it's our solution or somebody else's, you're probably looking at about a, 30% premium over just seal coating it, right? So, with install, maybe $1 or $2 a square foot, maybe on a small job. I mean, if you had a giant parking lot, less than $1, but if you're just talking about doing your driveway and get somebody mobilized and do that, $1 or $2 a square foot to have a highly reflective coating put down. So.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of variability. Are you talking on the surface coating side or on the roofing side? So. Okay, on the surface coating side, so what we found is that the right solutions generally add life to the expectancy of the asphalt and actually last longer than like traditional slurry coats and seal coats. That's not been the case for all the solutions, but there are solutions out there that'll actually last longer than like the asphalt fog seal coat that's currently out there, right? And actually do more to retain the binder and prevent oxidation as well, right? Which is what actually breaks down the asphalt, and then, you know, it's a capital issue at that point as a roads project. So can actually push that mill and repave out. Good question. All right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Drew. One thing you were right about, the villages, that stat is accurate. I used to live in Orlando. They also have a brewery right on site, which maybe that kind of equates to the other stat you gave us today. One thing you are wrong about is that you were not standing in between them and lunch. I am. So I will make this very brief. We are super thankful to our lunch sponsor today, Denart Construction. And it is, love it. It's provided by Brown Bag Catering. If y'all have not had Brown Bag yet, you are in for a treat. We've got their baked potato bar today with some turkey chili and all the, yes, I heard the yes. It's good, it's good. We've got turkey chili and all the toppings. If you are a vegetarian, we have some grilled veggies as an option, so we will let the vegetarians go first. But first, a couple of important details. Again, we are trying to have a low waste event today. All plates, bowls, cutlery, and napkins can be put in the compost bin along with any food scraps. Soda and water cans can be put in the recycling bin. And again, take a look at those signs for directions on what goes where. Lunch is set up in the lobby, and I was told that they are taking the foil off of it as we speak. So we will form a line going out. Lizzie, those doors in the back, or nope?
Out that way and then back in this way.
There we go. You're going to exit to your right, my left. I use the Disney World point with 2 fingers, never with one. So we'll go out that door and then back around to come in here. So we'll form a line going out through those doors, again, coming back in there. And then again, those that requested the vegetarian option, we're going to let you go first. And then Lizzie, I'm going to have you help with dismissing of the tables. So enjoy lunch. Feel free to chat. Find our speakers. If you had any questions, I'm sure they'll be happy. I'm speaking for Kendon and Grace and everyone else. So if y'all have any questions, feel free to ask them. And enjoy lunch.